Welcome to day 3. As data and analytics becomes more pervasive across all aspects of our lives, the ability to communicate in this language, that is, being data literate, is a new organizational readiness factor. Now, part of building a data literate organization is, of course, about technology and data methodology, but just as important is your organizational culture and leadership. Arts organizations will never use data like engineering-driven firms like Google or Netflix, but what can we learn from them? In this session, CI's VP of Analytics, Yosaif Cohain, will guide you through a session to inspire you to consider how your organization thinks about, uses, and values data. There will be a Q&A for this session, so please post your questions into the session chat. Following this session, please join us for one of 2 focus sessions. Creating your roadmap for Google Analytics 4, where CI's Ali Duffy-Kubalette will share an overview of the GA4 platform and offer a step-by-step guide to making a plan for your implementation. And the second session is CI's Digital Measurement Toolkit, where CI team members will lead you on a tour through 10 digital analytics platforms, many that you may not even know about. Yosaif, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Happy Friday and day 3 of boot camp. Thank you all for joining, and thank you, Eric, for that introduction. My name is Yosaif Cohain. I am a white male wearing a black button-down Oxford shirt with short brown hair and a trimmed beard, and I'm sitting in front of off-white closet doors. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm coming to you on this beautiful fall day from northern New Jersey, and I would like to acknowledge that this is native and ancestral and stolen land of the Munsee Lenape. I am the Vice President of Analytics at CI. This is my 8th boot camp and my 4th time presenting. I have been completely amazed by the sessions from the past 2 days. I feel like the bar has been set so incredibly high, and I'm going to do my best to keep the momentum going with what I know must be everyone's favorite, data. As I was starting my career, I lucked into perfect timing and fell into analytics. As we know, people's behavior has been shifting from offline to digital experiences. This is a beautiful rendering of that shift, where with time, the world started being seen more through screens. And in the spirit of Bootcamp's theme, metamorphosis, birds have even sadly mutated to become tweets. I was fascinated by technology and the internet and the ways it was changing our world. Now, the other movement that was happening alongside this behavioral shift from offline to online, though it was behind the scenes, was the exponential growth in data that was being collected. This is an abstraction of that growth, sort of like this Big Bang effect of data that started becoming available. As someone who was always into puzzles that tried deciphering the story and the logic that went alongside math, this was the perfect confluence for me. I wanted to be involved in digital strategy and business growth, and my way in was going to be data and uncovering the hidden meaning of what was happening through numbers. Data nowadays has gotten more embraced, but I have to say that when I started, this was not the case. It was very much seen as an annoyance, and many colleagues and many clients were very disinterested in it. With time, the world started catching on to this data movement. Companies were hiring for analytics people. Colleges started offering coursework and undergrad and postgrad degrees in analytics. Articles about the field started getting published. This is one from Harvard Business Review, where maybe it's a bit hyperbolic, but I will certainly take it. Here they boldly claim, data scientist, the sexiest job of the 21st century. I didn't put too much stock into these claims. I did make sure to forward them to my mom so she could get off my case just a little bit about my career choices. At CI, one of the privileges I get to have is participating in our onboarding program, which we call CIU. We intentionally hire people for values, not hard skills, and invest in our employees with CIU, where we can teach them the tools, platforms, and approaches that we use. This is a screenshot of our most recent cohort, the amazing cohort 24, who had the added challenge of not just going through a very tough curriculum, but doing so in this fully remote world that we're living in. In CIU, before we start off with things that are more in the weeds, like how to optimize campaigns or create reports, I get to lead 2 sessions. The first one is literally called We Love Data, where I try to get them excited about data and what we can tap into. The second session is called User-Centric Design, which can also be called Data-Driven Design. It's where we look at examples inside and outside the arts of how data has helped transform websites and apps and businesses. So today, we're going to talk about building data literacy in our organizations. And we're going to start off by looking outside the arts and how data is changing our world. We'll then talk about how companies build data literacy and what data literacy really is. And then we'll talk about how we apply this to ourselves and how arts organizations can be great at data. So let's get started. Netflix is one of the most data-driven companies out there. They have embraced and leveraged data to become enormously successful. Now, before I get started with this section, one of the things we've been trying to do with our bootcamp presentations is have a theme in each presentation. I don't have pets like Madge and Michelle. My glamour shots pale in comparison to Chrissy's, and finding a relatable theme for data is not very easy. So I had what I thought was a cute idea. I'll use Netflix. As it is, I want to talk about them and how they use data. Why not make that my theme? Surely that will be fun and non-controversial. Then, of course, I saw the news this past weekend regarding the new Chappelle special, which has been widely criticized as transphobic. I personally believe that Netflix and the other media sites should not be using their platforms to promote and spread content that is hateful and divisive. So I want to say that while I admire some of the ways Netflix has used data, in no way do I agree with all of their values or decisions. If this news would have come out a few weeks earlier, I would have figured out a different theme. Murphy's Law being what it is, the timing meant I need to stick with what I have. But I do think that there is a good cautionary tale to this as it relates to data. And that's borrowing on what Hannah Gadsby said recently when she called Netflix an amoral algorithm cult. I think using data is great and important, but never at the cost of values and morals. With that being said, let's see some examples of how Netflix is using data. First and foremost, Netflix leverages its mounds of data to create a highly personalized and relevant experience. There isn't a single version of Netflix. There are millions of permutations of Netflix. They're personalizing the titles that they're recommending to us. They're personalizing the rows that we see and their order. In this screenshot, I'm getting action movies, 90-minute comedies, and inspiring movies. They're even personalizing the imagery that we get for each title. Even if we get the same titles recommended, we don't all get the same images. It is estimated that roughly 75 to 80% of viewer activity is influenced by their algorithm. Their recommendation engine is central to their operation and is only made possible via their data. The algorithm is so critical that in 2009, they had a competition to see if someone could beat it by 10%. They provided a sample data set, and they did end up awarding that $1 million prize. Some team beat it by just over 10%. This is a screenshot from The Office, which I know is no longer on Netflix, but was too good an example to pass up, where Dwight is competing against the new website to see who can sell more paper, and Andy is keeping score on a dry erase board. You might remember back when Netflix had the star rating system, whereas now we have a thumbs up and thumbs down approach. And we can see screenshots of both options over here. Why did Netflix get rid of the star ratings? Because when they tested out the thumbs up and thumbs down approach, they saw a 200% increase in content ratings, a huge lift in usage. From their own words on their blog, every product change Netflix considers goes through a rigorous A/B testing process before becoming the default experience. That's one specific A/B test for the user interface, but this also applies to Netflix's business growth strategy. Here we have screenshots of 3 different article headlines. I'll read them. The first, Netflix tests the Play Something button on mobile, starting with Android. Next, Netflix tests a linear video channel. And lastly, Netflix is reportedly testing N+ service. Notice the operative word in each headline, tests. In a certain way, we can say that Netflix doesn't make changes. They run tests, and then they deploy winners. It would be way too risky for Netflix to make all of these changes based on gut and intuition and just roll them out to everyone and hope that they work. Instead, they have internal processes for using data to run tests so that they can have confidence in the decisions they make and the features that they roll out. There's this great story I had read about Netflix where they were considering adding the ability to download titles, excuse me. This is a screenshot of Frozen Planet with the trailer showing penguins running down an icy surface. And we can see the option on the left to play an episode and the option on the right to download it. And the story goes that the product team wanted to add downloading functionality, but senior leadership was very against it. They felt it was a distraction. It wasn't something that would be desired or helpful to their business model. So the product team did research and got data and saw things like 70% of YouTube users in India download videos. And the same was true for many consumers in Germany and other countries. They saw with data that there's hunger for this feature. And they used that data to push back on leadership and show the importance of the functionality in order to expand internationally. And of course, we see now that the functionality has made its way into the platform despite leadership's initial objections. And I just love this quote from the senior UX researcher at Netflix. I'll read it. "I am a nobody in this company. I am just some researcher. Yet I was able to push back against a strong and publicly stated opinion from the top leadership to rally excitement around this feature." That is what Netflix is all about. Netflix, of course, has a very big part of their team that is very into data. They employ hundreds of analysts, data scientists, researchers, data engineers, and so on. But data literacy isn't confined to those people. Data literacy is a core company value for everyone. This is a screenshot from the Netflix jobs website where they talk about their company values. And one of those that I'm highlighting here and will read out loud is, "You are good at using data to inform your intuition." Again, this isn't the job description for an analyst. It's for everyone. To work at Netflix, you need to have this skill. Also notice they aren't saying everyone needs to be amazing at Excel or have a background in statistics. They leave it as being good at using data to inform intuition. So we've seen lots of examples of Netflix and data: the personalization engine, the process for testing and rolling out features, and areas of business growth, the skills they look for, the culture they've built around data. It's not one thing, but a combination of things that makes Netflix great at data. And of course, it's not just Netflix. Data is happening all around us in many fascinating areas and is a force that is changing our world in many big ways. There are lots of examples we could look at. For the sake of time, I had to limit it to just 2 areas, which was a big struggle for me. So I have one is a newer field and one is an older one. Let's start with the newer one. This is a GIF showing a Tesla driving itself without any driver or passenger. Self-driving cars are possible because of sensors that collect data and algorithms that are built on top of that data. And here we're not just talking about the ability to read a book instead of driving the car, although that on its own, adding time to be productive, is extremely powerful. We're also talking about the potential for greater fuel and traffic efficiencies because cars will be able to communicate with each other and with the traffic grid. We're talking about the potential for many fewer car accidents and fewer deaths and injuries. And if we have fewer accidents, what happens to car insurance and traffic cops? Do we still need them? Of course, the technology isn't fully there yet, but it's coming. And because the technology is built using machine learning, as it's collecting more data now, we can only expect it to get better with time. The older field that we'll look at. Data is even changing archaeology, which I think is just so freaking fascinating. We have two images of Tanis over here. The Lost City from Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark. The one on the left is from Google Maps. It's kind of dark and green and shows some outlines of where they've been excavating. The one on the right is enhanced by algorithms and shows an ancient network of streets and houses which are completely invisible from ground level. Plants growing over buried structures tend to be less healthy because their root systems are stunted. So there are variations in crop growth above hidden ruins. These are variations we can't detect with the human eye, but that's where technology and algorithms come into play. There's this incredible TED Talk by Dr. Sarah Parcak. She won the TED Prize in 2016 about the work that she and her team are doing, where they take satellite imagery, that's their data source, and they use algorithms to detect these deviations. Through this type of approach, they have found more than 3,000 ancient settlements, more than a dozen pyramids, and over 1,000 lost tombs. She is the modern version of Indiana Jones and has probably the coolest job title in the world. She is a space archaeologist. So hopefully we're all in agreement that data can have some incredible applications and can contain a lot of value when used strategically. And I would add, data for us doesn't just mean selling more tickets or being more efficient with marketing initiatives, although of course, those are critical and great. It can also help us be better at fulfilling our mission and measuring that impact. Whether your mission includes something about education initiatives or community engagement or spreading the love of the art form, there most likely are ways that data can help us measure and improve in those areas. So let's talk about what it means to build data literacy. And let's start just with a definition. What is data literacy? Data literacy is the ability to read, write, and communicate data in context. And it's important to underscore that last part, context. Without it, we're not understanding or communicating properly. We're just spitting numbers at each other. Going a bit further, data literacy means understanding your data sources and the techniques applied to the data. It means knowing what types of questions you can ask of the data. Even if you're not the person that has access or will be the one that creates the report or runs the analysis, it means knowing what kind of information we have at our disposal and how we can use it. The research firm Gartner goes as far as saying that data literacy is an underlying component of digital dexterity. If we want to be good at digital, we want to use new and existing technologies to drive better business outcomes, then data literacy is not an optional nice to have. It's a fundamental aspect of being good at digital. The reason being is that digital is measurable. And we need to be able to leverage data to inform and measure the impact of our initiatives. Gartner has created their analytics ascendancy model as a way of visualizing and understanding different ways of using data and how data mature your organization is. And the way this model works is that we have an x-axis that shows difficulty, and we have the y-axis showing the value we would get from the stage of the work. And the model has 4 stages that we can walk through. The first stage is descriptive analytics. It's where we're using data for hindsight to understand what happened in the past. Think of things like sales reports, website traffic, campaign impressions and clicks, KPI dashboards, and so on. We are using data to quantify and measure the performance of a show, campaign, some other initiatives. Yes, this is the first stage and is the bottom left corner that I think we've all been trained to think of almost dismissively, but let's not do that. Having the ability to measure our initiatives is one of the differentiators of digital from offline, and it is incredible. In most cases, we can get this data in real time or pretty close to that. The data is not sampled. We have confidence in the data's accuracy. It can be rich and granular. And in many cases, we get that data for free from platforms like Google Analytics, from our email marketing platforms, from our ticketing platform, and so on. Being able to measure what happened is massively important. The next stage is what they call diagnostic analytics. It's where we go deeper and don't just ask what happened, but try to understand why it happened. We're not just using data for hindsight, we're using it for insight into learning more about our audiences and the decisions we want to make. This is where we take data from being about reporting to being about analysis. Think of narratives that we add to campaigns, deep dives that we conduct on the website, analyses we might do on surveys that we send out, and so on. And just like the model suggests, this is harder to do than generating reports, but it's also where we extract more value from our data. Continuing in the model, we next have predictive analytics. This is where we're looking to the future and using data for foresight. We're building models that predict what will happen based on historical data. Examples of this can include forecasts that we use to predict sales or to estimate media budgets. Modeling can be complicated and intimidating, but I would say that you don't have to dive into the deep end of the pool right off the bat. You can start with more simplified models and look to add to their complexity with time as you become more reliant on them and as you want to improve their performance. The last stage that we have in the model is what they call prescriptive analytics, where we're using data to try to answer how to make things happen. Prescriptive analytics is the hardest and arguably the most valuable aspect. It's where we use data and models, oftentimes machine learning, to prescribe the actions we should take. Think of things like recommendation engines or pricing models. We're not just predicting what we think will happen, we're assigning specific actions to take. The nuance between predictive and prescriptive is sometimes a bit tricky. An example could be a bank that uses algorithms and to forecast who is likely to cancel their credit card, and then magically offers them 50,000 free travel points or some other upgrade or benefit. Estimating who is likely to cancel is predictive analytics. Figuring out which offer to give them is prescriptive analytics. Getting away from banks and talking about the arts, predictive can be sales forecasting for a concert. Prescriptive can be figuring out what our campaign budget should be, what the timing for the campaign should look like, who should we target, what the messaging can include, or even if we should adjust pricing or discounting. I would imagine that most of us are not yet hitting on all four of these stages. And we might be thinking that this is nice in theory, but unrealistic for our organization. We'll talk about that more in a few minutes. And by no means am I trying to dismiss the difficulty of this work. We can see on the model this stuff gets progressively harder. But what I would stress is that this takes time. It's not a project that is solved in a week. And for some of the more advanced areas like predictive and prescriptive, and where we get into the very isolating and intimidating terms like AI and machine learning, a lot of this is beginning to be integrated directly into the platforms that we use. Google, for example, has announced that they're moving to a world of predicted conversions. Their new analytics platform, GA4, is using machine learning to connect the dots when cookies aren't available. Michelle and Madge spoke about all the ways Google is using machine learning in search engine marketing. They're doing that work for us. There are CMS plugins that have smart recommendation engines built into them. Some even offer personalization options. So we can still be using these methodologies even if they're not being custom built in-house. As someone that works as a consultant in analytics, I like to read up on the details of what other consulting and research firms publish and think of how to apply that for the arts. We've talked about Gartner already. Here we're going to look at the consulting firm McKinsey. They conducted a survey of 1,000 companies to see how they use data and where their successes and challenges are. And from that, they isolated the leading companies, what they're calling the breakaway companies, and look to see what traits they share. They're trying to identify what makes a company good at data. This is an image from a series on Netflix called We Are the Champions, and it's the cheese rolling episode in which a town in England comes together once a year, it's their tradition, to literally roll a big wheel of cheese down this very steep mountain and then race after it. So we have here a picture of the winner running down, but also of a contender that is in the process of rolling over. It's a great episode. Now, I recognize that McKinsey's study is one of big corporations and is not specific to the arts, but I believe it's our job to look outside the arts to see how bigger companies are leading the way technologically, and then we have to interpret and contextualize that for the arts. We can almost even consider the research its own form of data, and like we said about being data literate, it's about understanding that data with context. So from their study, they categorize the attributes of the breakaway companies into 3 main areas. The first one, the successful companies align on strategy. This, of course, is an image from the amazing Queen's Gambit, where Beth is looking off to the side after dominating yet another chess match. What do they mean by aligning on strategy? First off, the leadership team is completely on the same page as far as setting an analytics vision and strategy. And it's critical to pause here and repeat that last part, analytics vision and strategy. We have to think of data as a strategic initiative. It is not a project. It's not a Google Analytics implementation or a predictive model we build or an analysis we conduct. Those certainly can be part of your roadmap, but they are not the strategy. We have to set a vision of where we want to get with data and how we want to use it strategically. And from there, we need to create the roadmap of how we get there. Second, as far as the breakaway companies and strategy, the leadership team sets a goal of integrating analytics across all operations, not just certain business units. We don't want data living in silos with individual teams or individual people. The most successful companies find ways to embed it across all teams and foster cross-team collaboration around data. The next trait of the breakaway companies, they build the right foundations of data, technologies, and people. This is an image from Cheer, a documentary miniseries about a cheerleading team in a small town in Texas, which completely opened my eyes to a sport I knew nothing about. Here they are practicing some floor routine with 3 cheerleaders, somehow doing handstands while other cheerleaders are supporting them and holding them up. Or for my metaphor, they are building a foundation. I don't think that's a cheerleading term, so please don't quote me on that one. When McKinsey looked into this category, the findings of the breakaway companies were, first off, they have a clearly defined data strategy. They're being strategic and intentional about data collection and usage. Next, they have strong data governance practices. They've defined processes and rules relating to their data, how they maintain data standards and accuracy, and controlling who can access which parts of it. Next, they use more sophisticated methodologies. Connecting to our previous model, they go higher in the ascendancy model. They're not just using data for reporting. Lastly, and maybe not so surprisingly, and I would say somewhat frustratingly, they have bigger teams focused on analytics. This one certainly is harder for the arts. I don't think anyone here has or likely ever will have a big analytics team. So we'll talk more about how we can translate this for us a little bit later. The last trait that McKinsey identified is what they call conquering the last mile. Here we have a picture from The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, the Western from the Coen brothers, where Buster, the singing cowboy, is riding his horse in the desert while singing and playing his guitar. Conquering the last mile is the part in the analytics journey where we turn insights into outcomes and change. This is the part where the most value is extracted from analytics. From McKinsey's data, 90% of the breakaway organizations devote more than half of their analytics budget to the last mile. So again, 90% or almost all of the successful companies are dedicating most of their analytics budget to the last mile. And the way that these companies go about doing this requires what they refer to as embedding, which generally falls into a two-step process. First off, it means making analytics extremely user-friendly and customized for each group using the data. Our goal isn't for everyone to be an analyst or a statistician or someone that pulls the data from the platform, but to be data literate and to know what the data means and what questions to ask of it. So whoever is preparing the data needs to do everything they can to make it as accessible and user-friendly as possible. I'll say two key words that can help make this happen: dashboards and automation. These can be monumental in making your data more visible and accessible. If you're not currently automating dashboards, you should add that to your roadmap. Second, and the bigger challenge, is infusing analytics-based decision-making into the company culture. It means creating an environment where data isn't just required, but where the team embraces analytics. They actually want it because they view it as a critical tool that adds value and makes them better and more impactful at their jobs. So, with those frameworks in mind, let's shift gears a little bit and see how arts organizations can be great at data. Now, before we start here, a couple of important notes so that maybe we can be a bit kinder to ourselves. Number one, we are not alone in this. This is a gif of the alien from Mars Attacks, the Tim Burton sci-fi comedy from the mid-90s. If you're too young to have seen this movie and are up for a very silly one, I would say check it out. So we might see what Netflix and other big companies are doing and hear about all of these breakaway companies and think that we are behind everyone. That is not the case. Deloitte conducted a survey of their own and found that 67% of responders are not comfortable using data from their tools and resources. A similar study by Accenture found that 75% of employees are uncomfortable when working with data. So we might have some work to do, but so do most other companies. This is not easy to solve. Number two, let's recognize and celebrate the great work that we already are doing with data. Most of us are using data for media and campaigns in very smart ways to target audiences, to measure and optimize, to inform future initiatives. Many of you are running surveys to learn more about your audiences and are segmenting your databases based on previous purchasing behavior, maybe based on cultural segments, based on demographics, or based on other data. And many of you are already using data for forecasts and models to predict sales and behavior. Some models are more advanced, some might be more simplified, and that's fine too. We've heard so much over the past 2 days of how data is being used. From Kirsten and Emily about digital performances and video data. We heard from Mia from the Joyce Foundation about fundraising and folding data into grant applications. A lot of great work with data is already happening. One example in particular, if you're interested in learning more about modeling, there's a great CI to I podcast episode titled How the Art Institute Uses Data to Predict the Future. It's with Andrew Simnick from the Art Institute of Chicago, where he discusses how they built a model to predict attendance, some of the variables and the work that went into creating the model's evolution with time, and how they've been using it. I also want to recognize that we have a wide variety of organizations in attendance, big and small, across different genres, some earlier in your analytics journey and some further along. So you will need to figure out what's right for you and your organization. This is a gift from The Lion King. We have Simba and Rafiki talking, where Rafiki says, change is good. And Simba responds, yeah, but it's not easy. None of what we're going to talk about is in the easy category. These are not items we cross off our checklist next week, but they are important if we want to keep working towards being better with data. So I have 6 categories or 6 pillars for us to discuss as far as how we can work on our organizational data literacy. The first one, we need to work on culture and integration. We need to make data an asset that is embraced by our organization. This is an image from Wild Wild Country, a documentary series about a controversial cult that built a utopian city in the middle of Oregon. We see in the image, in the bottom left corner, we have the guru, and we have all the followers, all dressed in orange, staring intently at him. Analytics is not a platform or a project. It's a philosophy that we're buying into and integrating into our workflow. Gartner's study found that organizations with the strongest cultural orientation to data-driven decision-making were twice as likely to have exceeded business goals. We need to ask ourselves how we are using and valuing our data. Are we making data-driven and data-informed decisions? Do we have commitment to analytics across all levels? Are we holding team members accountable to using data? In meetings, do we ask for data points that back decisions? Have we made it easy for team members to access the data they need? When we use data in new ways, how can we celebrate that in order to generate momentum and get other team members more bought in? One of the many acronyms in the world of analytics is HIPPO. That would be the highest paid person's opinion, with the idea being that in companies that don't have a data-driven culture, the HIPPO, the person with the biggest paycheck, makes the decisions often based on gut and intuition. We want to avoid that. Think of that Netflix story with the downloads. It was the opposite of HIPPO. The researchers' data won over senior leadership's opinion. We have to keep pushing on this front within the context of our institutions and who we are. We're not looking to sacrifice artistic integrity or organizational values. We are looking for the appropriate opportunities to infuse data into the decisions we're making. Next, we need to focus on people and resources. We have to invest in our people and find time for more analysis. This is an image from Money Heist with a person in a mask that's leaving the bank they just robbed with a duffel bag full of money in one arm and a shotgun in the other. The metaphor here being that I know it's easy to say we need more time and we need more budget, and that's not very realistic. So no, we shouldn't rob banks for that cash infusion, but we might need to push to get that time and budget from other internal areas. Avinash Kaushik, the digital marketing evangelist at Google and probably the face of web analytics, has what he calls the 10-90 rule. His rule is that if you are allocating an analytics budget, 10% of it should go towards the tools and platforms, 90% of it should go towards the people. We're not going to hire a big analytics team, so we have to invest in ourselves and provide our team with the core education, support materials, and the time to do this work. Otherwise, it just will not happen, and it's unfair to expect that it will. I mentioned CIU at the beginning. Our employees are not applied math or statistics majors. Like I said, we hire for values, things like a passion for the arts and curiosity, and we teach the data stuff. And I would argue that this is where we can be extremely successful. You know your organization and your audience and your art form better than anyone. You already have the context part. So now we need to up the data and the time part with proper planning and investment. Next, we need to define process and methodology around data. We have to establish standards for utilization and oversight. This is a scene from American Factory, the Oscar-winning documentary that was created in partnership with the Obamas about a plant that closes in Ohio and then reopens after being bought by a Chinese company. Part of being good at data is having defined process around it. How we deal with new requests, who's using which data, how we maintain our setups, how we document learnings, how we automate reports, and so on. We don't want different team members reinventing the wheel. We don't want them using no methodology at all or just doing things their own way. We want to define our organization's process and methodology. Number 4, we need to spend some time on our tools and data. We need to make sure that our platforms are working properly and giving us what we need. Here we have Steve from the repair shop, where he's repairing some antique clock, and you can see some of the gizzards and mechanisms of what he's fixing. We need to audit our systems and identify how they're working and if they're meeting our needs. Do we have the data we need to learn what we want? We should be intentional about the data we're collecting and making sure it's capturing the key data points we need. Do we trust our data to be accurate? Of course, we then need to create a plan for fixing the broken or missing items. It's important to say, though, that there's this expression in analytics of garbage in, garbage out. If the data is garbage, then we can expect the reports, analyses, insights, the models, all of that to be garbage as well. Now, while that is true, that sometimes can serve as a crutch. Even if your setup isn't perfect, most of us either already have great data to work with, or we can get to a place with great data relatively quickly and not too expensively. Ticketing and email platforms often provide their own data. The same goes for social media and some video platforms like Vimeo. Yes, Google Analytics oftentimes needs customization, but even a standard setup in many cases can be a great launching pad for site analysis, even if it isn't fully complete. Number 5, the range and opportunity. We need to expand our bounds of how we're using data. This is an image from Little Miss Sumo. It's a short documentary about a female sumo wrestler who was fighting to expand the traditional definition that only men can be sumo wrestlers. And in that process, she's also pushing for more advancement in the greater gender inequality fight in Japan. Here she's training on a beach with the ocean behind her. We need to look at the aspects of our work that are using data and see if we can expand that towards other areas. Are we using it for paid campaigns? What about organic social posts, organic search and SEO? What about email and the website? What about towards non-marketing related areas, education, development, customer service? How can we apply our data practices towards other parts of our work and our organization? The last one, depth. How do we take our analytics to the next level? This is an image from Skyladder, The Art of Saiguo Zhang, a documentary about the Chinese artist's project of creating a ladder of fire that climbs the sky where he wants to connect the Earth to the universe. We need to evaluate how deep we're going with our analytics work. Or, connecting it to the model we've discussed already, how high are we in the analytics ascendancy model? Are we at a place where we're mostly creating reports, or are we further along? And if not, how do we get there? Okay, so that's a lot. And like I mentioned, this is not something we solve overnight. What we need to do is create a plan. We need to formulate our vision of where we want to go, and then we need to create that roadmap of how we get there. This is a GIF of Leslie from Parks and Rec. She's in front of a big pile of binders and saying, I mean, they're color-coded for God's sake. Leslie has a plan and a binder for everything. They're even color-coded. So we need to channel our inner Leslie a bit and create our plan. Now, as I'm starting to finish up, I'd like to introduce a framework and a construct for assessing where we are and creating that plan of ours. We have over here what's called a radar chart or a spider web chart with the 6 categories we just identified, and we have 5 rings or 5 circles in our spider web. Let me pause for a minute and credit Stefan Hamill for creating the Web Analytics Maturity Model. He's a big name in the analytics community. He's someone I've been following for years. He created this model the categories we reviewed and its visualization that we're about to see. And I've tweaked it a bit to make it more relevant for the arts. I told you I like to do that. He's dealing with corporations with bigger teams and bigger budgets. If you want, you can go to his website and take his assessment for free. Though I think you will see that some of the options there are not relevant for our world. So the way the model works is that we create a heuristic where we define a score between 0 and 5 and what that score looks like for each category. And what we need to do is rank ourselves against each category on a score between 0 and 5. For example, if we take our depth category, our heuristics and scores might look something like this. We'd get a 0 if we don't look at the data at all. We'd get a 1 if occasionally we pull some top metrics that are loosely defined. We'd get a 2 if we have a KPI that's a key performance indicator dashboard that we're automating. We get a 3 if we conduct some deep dives periodically. Maybe we'd get a 4 if we have a predictive model built on top of the data. And then maybe we'd get a 5 if we're personalizing offers based on the data and based on the model. Before you jot these down very quickly, I want to be clear that these heuristics are not prescriptive, and they will vary across organizations. Different organizations will have different visions for their data strategy. They will also have different abilities and resources to reach that vision. So yours might look different than this. So I am not going to distill the heuristics for each of our 6 categories. Not only would that be pretty time consuming, and I would say pretty boring, it's also not going to be applicable to everyone. So if you like this framework, as I show it over the next 2 slides, and it's just one framework you can use, there are others, I would encourage you to define for yourselves what these scores can look like. And I would absolutely love it, truly, if you email that to me so I can keep learning from you all and so I can help answer questions or give my 2 cents if you would like them. So the way the model works is that after we define our heuristics and we rank ourselves for each category, we'll get something that looks like this. In this example, we see a high score for tools and data, a 4 in this example, but low scores for our other categories. And as a side note, this is what Stefan has said he would often uncover in his work with companies that struggle with data, that they've thrown money at tools and platforms and expect that to solve everything, but they have no defined process. They don't have a culture that embraces and integrates data. They don't have the right people and resources. So this is what I love about this construct. We easily see an imbalance in our work towards being great at data. And that's where it can help identify our weak spots and our opportunities. And it can help us make a plan that prioritizes where we need to improve. Because the central premise is that we need to be balanced in these categories if we want to be great at data. It's not just one area, it's all of them. Remember with Netflix, it wasn't just the algorithm, it was all the things they're doing. So once you've assessed yourself and identified your vision and made your plan, you measure again after a year and then again, because we need to plan around incremental growth across all our categories. And we need to set expectations that this is measured over a long time period, not in weeks or months. This is what we want to see. We have 3 spider webs over here showing year 1, year 3, and year 5, where we're seeing a fairly even blue circle indicating balance, only we're seeing it expand with time, indicating improvement. We're not going from 0 to 5 in any of the categories. That would be the wrong strategy. Instead, we have progress across all of them. As I'm running out of time, let me wrap up with this image from Squid Game, the enormously popular new show where we have the game enforcers in their pink uniforms and their weird masks, and all the game contestants in their green tracksuits. And we have a quote here. I'll read it. "Fear has replaced apathy as the #1 enemy of data." I can relate to this one a lot. When I started my career, people dismissed the value of analytics. That perception has generally changed. More people now understand how important data can be, but there's fear attached with it now. I'm going to get it wrong. It's too technical. I can't do it. We need to find a way to conquer our fear around data, get help where we need it, and dispel the notion that we can't do it. Instead, we need to inspire ourselves and our colleagues to embrace data as best we can. If you feel lost or unsure of how to begin, start with something small. Define the minimum viable inputs, the minimum data you need to get where you need to. Measure your progress and use that to build momentum and go a little deeper next time. And then just keep repeating that cycle. With work and with time, we can do this. And I would recommend one last thing. This is advice from McKinsey that I think they phrase so well. Work your way backwards. This is a scene from Seinfeld. Yet again, we have Jerry and George at the diner. And this, of course, is the episode that starts at the end and works its way back to the beginning. Rather than looking to start right away with fixing a specific setup or adding a new dashboard or building a new model, let's start at the end. Let's start by identifying the decision-making processes where improvement would be the most impactful. As an example, Priya mentioned yesterday how important email is. If you're underperforming here, maybe that's your starting point. How can we improve our email marketing initiatives? Or maybe you're about to go through a website redesign and you want to make sure it's best set up for success. Then identify the insights and the information that would influence your decisions. In our website example, maybe it's understanding where behavior is currently concentrated on the site. Or maybe it's an analysis to see if people are browsing and exploring your site, or to see if they're targeted and focused. What type of analysis would most influence the way you go about designing the new site? After we've gone through those steps, we can pinpoint how we go about getting those insights. Do we have that data already? If not, how do we get it? What kind of analysis would we need? This is strategy before execution. So continuing in Bootcamp's Choose Your Own Adventure theme, we have here the image from Black Mirror, the interactive episode that Netflix created, where you literally choose on the remote how the episode progresses. So up next, we have two different options for you for getting better with data. If you want to dive deep into the future of web analytics, Ali will be talking about what's amazing and what's challenging about GA4, Google's new analytics platform. Everyone here has a website, and I would guess 99% of us use Google Analytics, and GA4 has data for everyone. So this can be a great opportunity to learn more about that new and complex platform. If you're earlier in your analytics journey, if you're less hands-on, or if you're more interested in going wide instead of deep, my colleagues have put together a tour of 10 platforms and tools that we love to use. Each tour stop will be about 5 minutes, and the goal will be to show you what the tools are capable of doing and why we love using them, not to do an in-depth training on any one of them. I think either option is a great one, and I hope this session and this data block of bootcamp will help you become more comfortable with data and more prepared to build a more data literate and data-driven organization. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for your time and for your attention. Every year, I feel so re-energized and so inspired by bootcamp, and I feel very, very lucky to be part of this special community and to keep collaborating and learning from you all. So thank you.